Hi, this is Pat Johnson, and in this mini lecture, we're going to talk about social facilitation. The history of social facilitation is interesting because for a long period of time, psychologists and just the general public had noticed that the presence of others increases our performance, but not always. In other words, in study after study, researchers found that when we were doing a task and other people were around, our performance increased. But every once in a while, a study would show just the opposite and would show that performance greatly decreased when others were present. So what's going on? Well, let's start out with our fancy definition of social facilitation, and then we'll go into some animal and human examples and talk about the factors that are involved. Social facilitation is the improved performance on simple or well-learned tasks in the presence of others. And then I also put in parentheses, and decreased performance on difficult or poorly learned tasks in the presence of others. So, we have two factors that are involved. We have the presence of others versus being alone, and we also have whether or not the task is easy or whether the task is difficult. Bob Zion, yeah, I know it looks like Zajunk, but his name is pronounced Zion. Dr. Zion did research with roaches. Now you may be wondering, what do roaches have to do with human behavior? And it's true, we very rarely use animal research in social psychology because we're looking at human behavior. But Bob Zion did a very clever piece of research showing that social facilitation worked not just in animals, but in humans. And he really isolated the two factors of whether or not the task is easy or difficult, and whether or not the task is alone or in the presence of others. So what did he do? He randomly assigned roaches to different conditions and then measured their performance. And so if this is sounding familiar to our research section at the beginning of the semester, yes, this is an experiment. So let me show you the setup. This is an easy task. And so what Zion did is he would put a roach right here in the entrance box, and then he would shine a light. So this is a plexiglass tube. All the roach has to do to get away from the light, and we all know that when a light is turned on, roaches run. And all the roach had to do was go down the tube and get away from the light. So the independent variable is whether or not the task is alone or in the presence of others, and whether or not the task is easy or difficult. So in this version, we have, it's an easy task. All the roach has to do is run down the plexiglass tube, and there are no other roaches around. There are two empty tubes here and here, and so the dependent variable is how long it takes the roach to run down. So let's give a human example of this. I'm a runner, not so much now as in the past, and I used to run quite a few marathons and a lot of half marathons and 10Ks and 5Ks. But I always noticed that when I was training, if I was running alone, I had a certain cruising pace just for a regular everyday run. But if I happened to be running past where there were other people out, either in their yards or maybe a construction crew, or running past where there were other people, it really affected my performance. And just like roaches, what happens is when we're alone on an easy task, we have one level of performance. But when others are watching, and so in this case, here's our roach, And there would also be other roaches in our plexiglass tubes over here. And so they can see our roach and our roach can see them. And all our roach has to do is get down the tube and get away from the light. And it turns out that this is a situation that our roach does better in. When it's an easy task and others are watching, our performance is enhanced. So we do better when it's an easy task and others are watching. Okay? Now, and I found the same thing when I was running. If there were other people around, my pace increased without any sense of increased effort. My pace increased by a minute per mile. And if you're a runner or you know anything about running, a minute per mile increase in pace is a significant increase in somebody's pace. So let's now talk about Bob Zion's second experiment. On this one, he had a difficult task. And for this one, again, he used roaches. And what he did was he used a T maze and he blocked off the roach going straight or the roach going right. So what our roach had to do was, here's our roach. He has to run and get out of the light by making a 90-degree turn. Now, roaches don't have very sophisticated brains. We'll learn about that in a later chapter. But so this task for a roach was quite difficult. And again, this is plexiglass, and these little observatories were empty. There were no other roaches watching. So Bob Zion would release the roach, he'd turn the light on, and the roach would have to run down and then try to figure out how to get away from the light, and would do that by doing a 90-degree turn. Zion contrasted that with a difficult task, same task, so it's blocked off here, it's blocked off here. Our roach has to make a 90-degree turn, but the kicker here is that in these other tubes, there were other roaches. So other roaches are all around. They can see our roach can see them, and our roach has to get away from the light while other roaches are watching. Now, let's give a human equivalent to this. Imagine that you're taking the cumulative final for this class, another class. You're taking a very difficult cumulative final. In one scenario, you're alone. Maybe there's somebody to monitor to make sure you don't cheat, but they're on the other side of the room. They're not really in your space. They're not bothering you. It's a difficult task and you're fairly alone. On the other hand, imagine taking the cumulative final. You're in a room, there's lots of people in the room, and I, your teacher, am standing over your left shoulder, maybe going, as you're taking the test. Now, which is going to be easier, alone or with others watching? Both with the roaches, and as you can imagine, in the testing situation, it was a lot easier. Here we are. It's a lot easier on a difficult task if we are alone. So again, increased performance when the task is difficult when we're alone. Now you may be sitting there thinking, but roaches don't have brains like we do. They probably aren't sitting there going, oh my gosh, this is a difficult task. How am I going to do this with other roaches watching? But roaches do experience autonomic arousal. In other words, when other roaches are present, their heart rate increases, their speed increases. So it makes sense that in a difficult task, increased heart rate, increased arousal, excuse me, increased arousal is going to hinder performance on something that's very difficult. Imagine taking the test with your heart rate just going a mile a minute. And if any of you experience test anxiety, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But imagine you're running a race and your heart rate is increased. That's going to do you very good service. That arousal will actually increase your performance. So, in summary, social facilitation theory shows us that with easy tasks, we do better when others are present, and with difficult tasks, we do poorly when others are present. And that's social facilitation theory.